Welcome to Chop and Brew. I'm Chip Walton. In this episode, we're brewing a session beer with a unique twist, a wild rice mild. The recipe comes from Michael Dawson's homebrew book, Mashmaker. The beer takes a traditional English dark mild and creates in it a new layer of nutty and earthy flavor by adding cooked wild rice to the mash. First, I'll walk you through the recipe and my brew-in-a-bag brew day. Then we have some quick tasting notes on the beer with badass Bryon Adams and DonO. And look who shows up.
Oh, look
It's Mr. Mashmaker himself. Before we get into it, Chop and Brew would like to thank Imperial Yeast for their support. Imperial's new seasonal release is Bubbles, a yeast for hard apple cider and other fruit fermentations. It's available October and November 2019 at your favorite homebrew supply. More information at imperialyeast.com. And the generosity of our Patreon supporters. Join them to keep the show on and poppin' like an airlock at patreon.com/chopandbrew. Before we get to brewing, I want to share some notes on the recipe directly from Dawson, as he writes in the book. And while I regularly refer to the wild rice as the rice in this video, I should point out that wild rice is not actually rice, but in fact a species of wild grass and a very important grain to the culinary and cultural history of Minnesota. Dawson tells us that the sweet and nutty character of wild rice, as well as its body-enhancing proteins, should be right at home in a dark mild. He points out that wild rice is not only nutritious to the eater or drinker, but also to our beer's yeast, as it contains all kinds of stuff our yeast cells will dig: zinc, phosphorus, magnesium, and potassium. As you might imagine, the grist for a wild rice mild is fairly simple and small. For a 5-gallon batch, we're talking just 5 pounds of raw pale ale malt, 10 ounces of Simpson's dark crystal malt, and 4 ounces of British pale chocolate malt. Hops are also easy, just a ½ ounce of Glacier. For yeast, Dawson suggests you use your favorite English strain. I used Imperial Yeast pub strain, which I have found to be a good choice for British ales, milds, bitters, ESB, and the like. Fun fact, after it fermented the wild rice mild with great success, Dawson, DonO, and I pitched a mega barleywine wort on top of the pub yeast cake, and it went to work. We'll talk a little bit more about that later.
It was a kind of a high pressure,
We almost had a fight over
high stress brew day, but you know what won out in the end?
friendship.
As for the wild rice, Dawson tells us that like many other adjuncts, wild rice doesn't have any enzymes to break down its starchy components into something fermentable, so it needs to be mashed with a good diastatic base malt, such as raw pale ale malt. Dawson's suggestion is to cook the wild rice ahead of time, which is exactly what I did, following the package directions but leaving out the suggested salt. This means rinsing the wild rice well to clean it of any dirt or unwanted particles, then adding to cold water. You heat the water and wild rice together until boiling. Once boiling, reduce the heat to a simmer and let it simmer for about 45 minutes. During that time, the wild rice will absorb much, if not all, of that water. Add more if it seems like it's beginning to hard cook or go dry. After 45 minutes, I still had a good bit of water left. Here I could have just strained the wild rice and added the grain only to my mash, but I figured I might as well use it all and see what additional boost the cooking liquid might add to the flavor of the beer. While the rice simmered, I got my brew-in-a-bag mash water ready in my 8-gallon kettle, which means this is another 2-burner stovetop special.
Hey y'all, alright, here we go. Got the strike water up to 163. Gonna put the bag in. The grains are pretty cold. They've been chilling, so I kind of went a little bit higher on the strike water. Let's get our mashers in. Yeah, son. Yeah. Quick temperature read. Right now it's 155. That's a little high, but let's get this rice in there. Take another reading. We can add some water if we want. Boom, y'all. Secret ingredient. Well, it's not a big secret, but it's an ingredient. Here we go. Ooh, splish splash. Rice was taking a bath. All up in the mash last night. Dip it, dip it, dip it. Why not? Get all that good rice up out of there. Ooh, look at that. Got some grains. Got some wild rice. I would say the water got noticeably darker after the rice went in. It went from like a little weedy blonde gold to now it's like a little slight brown amber. So yeah, we're gonna get some color as well as flavor, I believe, out of that rice and its water. That's just a couple of cups of cold water. Minnesota cold water right now. I'm in some cold water. As you can see, it says about 151 and a half. We were going for 150 to 152. It was 154. I hit it with that splash of cold water. I'm gonna leave it as is. We're gonna lose a little bit because it's a thin mash, a thin walled mash kettle, and we're indoors in my cold house. Check back a little later. Whoop. Halfway through the mash, giving it a temperature check. You can see it definitely got darker. Picking up color from the chocolate malt, the crystal malt, the wild rice, I assume. See how our mash is holding? It says 63. That's not bueno. Oh, hey, it's on Celsius, y'all. Okay. Alright, so we're at 148. I might bump it up with a little bit of heat. It's a good thing about brewing a bag, and kind of why I did this today is so I could add a little heat. I don't want this to be upper 140, so I'm going to put some heat on it. I did want to make one note. So I got the heat on about medium. I'm trying to keep the bag lifted off the bottom so it doesn't burn or scorch, and that also kind of stirs this wort. But I've noticed, I can already tell that when I lift this out to drain it later, it is going to be a little more gelatinousy and not as quick to drain as most mashes, which is obviously, I would assume, because of the rice. I'm also noticing that this wort to be is a little, it's cloudier. It's hazy, cloudy, you know, which isn't out of the absolute norm for a brew in a bag, but it just has this like kind of like gooey sheen to it that I can tell might also be from throwing in all that liquid along with the rice. So we'll see, depending on how it turns out. Maybe I should have rinsed that rice and just put the rice in to be a grain instead of having all that juice and stuff. But that's the update from the mash kettle. Here we are. We have mashed / brewed in a bag, or mashed in a bag. I've drained it using my handy dandy grill method, where I put a grill on it, put the bag on top. I took a gravity reading. It was about 1036, 9 bricks, which is supposed to be about the starting gravity after boiling. So, and I was also at about 4.5 gallons. So those two things made me more comfortable with hand sparging with about a gallon of my tap water, which is scalding hot, 135 degrees, which brought me not only up to like a better starting volume for boiling, but it also brought the OG, the pre-boil gravity down to 1032. Yep, so 1030, 32, I can't remember. But all that's to say, we're in a good position for boiling off a little and getting to that 1036, 1038 OG range. The only issue is it's like -3 outside. I don't really want to hang outside and boil. I also don't want to just leave it in the garage boiling and assume the propane hasn't run out or my garage didn't explode. So I'm kind of at a weird point where I have to figure out what to do, because this guy really doesn't come to a boil on my stovetop, even on 2 burners. It's just a pain. After a little bit of internal dialogue and debate and consideration, this is what I came up with. I'm not sure if it's the safest plan. I basically have, this is a 2-gallon kettle that's at about a 1.5 gallons. This is a 5-gallon kettle that's at about 4.25. So I'm gonna boil these side by side. I'm gonna there's only the 1/2 ounce of hop, so I'll probably do like 0.3 ounces, 0.2 ounces. I considered just boiling this one and leaving this one pretty warm, but not actually boiling, and then adding them. And I don't know the nerdiness of the science to know whether or not boiling almost 1/3 of your wort would make for whatever. So this is the way I'm going to do it. I'm going to be very careful for boil overs. This is a sample of the wort thus far, pre-boil. It's the thing it just basically tastes like to me is sweet tea. It tastes very much like sweet tea, but not an over-the-top Milo's kind of sweet tea you'd get down south at a fast food restaurant, but like a fairly low percentage of sweet tea, but it's got also the rice, the earthiness, the enjoyable kind of tea, black tea kind of notes to it. Again, earthy, toasty. But sweet tea really jumped out at me once I got the wort sample chilled and kind of am drinking it. But so we're about to go into watch out mode up in here, y'all, because this is gonna be dangerous-ish. You probably won't see it, but I'll let you know how it goes.
After dividing the boil into 2 kettles, everything went smoothly from there on out. I added the hops per schedule, took the kettles down to the basement to chill, and combined them into a single bucket to ferment. The beer turned out great. A really nice beer to have on tap for the start of the winter. Wonderful clarity and a lovely amber brown color. Towards the end of the keg, I finally got over to DonO's basement to share some with him and badass Bryon Adams.
So we're here with DonO. Hey, you're not DonO.
That's DonO.
All right. Quick taste of notes in the basement of DonO with the DonO and the badass Bryon Adams and his ugly auburn jacket. So this is Wild Rice Mild, also known as Wild Mice Riled. Because I cannot...
Wild rice mild?
Wild mice are getting riled up. So Bryon actually brewed one too, so I thought it would be fitting to have him in here. And Don, you've had this, I think, a couple times.
I've had both of theirs.
So it's like 3.4%.
Yours.
Pretty small beer. Kind of just your real quick, your elevator pitch tasting notes.
Of this one?
Mm-hmm.
It's very nice. I like the flavor that comes from the wild rice.
Yeah.
It's very unique. I've never tasted that. To me, it's kind of spicy, maybe like Belgian sugar spicy, maybe.
Wow.
It's very unique. When I made mine, I wasn't sure if I put too much caramel in there, because at first I'm like, oh god, I overdid it with the caramel.
Yeah.
But then I fought with myself, thinking maybe it's from the rice. Who would have thought that rice, wild rice in a beer would taste like this? Because wild rice plain, I don't dig it.
Really?
Oh, you don't?
I get a lot of wild rice from this. That earthiness, that graininess, kind of mushroom, for lack of a better word, but a very kind of like umami-ness, like a savoriness to it that pushes the mild that could just be very clean cut and clean and kind of watery feeling almost up into a different dimension. It's got the chocolate, it's got the crystal, and now it's got that wild rice. What about you, DonO?
I think you are hitting the spot about the mushroom, kind of like a earthy, herbal, moist, moss earth type of characteristic.
There's somebody at the door.
Dawson's here.
Think
Dawson's
that.
here. Who is it? Oh, look at this!
Is
this thing
it's
on?
a setup. It's a setup.
Is this thing on?
Tell us what you think of this wild rice mild as quickly as possible.
Sign the NDA quick.
And you've had it.
It's a non-Dawson agreement. I believe.
Oh, right.
Oh, that's good.
No Dawson.
Try mine.
What? Is this different?
No, it's the same
You
one.
just want me to get your terms,
Yeah.
right? Cool. It's nice and warm in here.
Warmer than outside.
Yeah.
Why don't you step off to the side real quick? We'll wrap this up while you get undressed.
Just stand in the back, like
you
security.
can go over there.
No, not that.
No, don't go all the way outside.
Going on. Bye.
There
Knows
goes
how to make an
Dawson.
We ain't. Come on in, man.
Come
in,
on,
Dawson.
man.
It's too
Come
cold
on
out
in,
there.
man. You can go over by the heater.
Yeah, man.
A little.
Or over here, you can't see here.
Oscillated. You got to keep it oscillated.
So before Dawson came through, you were saying.
I was gonna say that making a beer that has a low alcohol but a decent amount of flavor, I always find to be an interesting challenge for a brewer, commercial or home. And I think this beer hits that mark. It is reminiscent of a mild that you would have, which is just a low gravity, low alcohol, brownish beer that you can drink
Yeah.
a lot of.
I could drink a lot of Imperial pints of this for sure.
And I think
I'd like to have this on a hand pump.
I think the wild rice probably does contribute a little bit of character.
What'd you say about the mineral?
Well, it was that Imperial pub yeast, which is, I think can kind of have some of that Englishy mineraliness to it. So you got like minerally and earth. It's a very non-hoppy, non-aggressive beer, which is its point. But I do think, to your point, adding that layer of flavor kind of like brings something new that doesn't necessarily have to be hop oomph or alcohol oomph or barreled. But I want to talk just super quick. You brewed one of these, but it came out way higher original gravity because your system just kind of magically does that.
Yes.
We had that at Barry Salem's. We both agreed it's richer. Yeah. It was sweeter. I almost kind of thought it was like almost getting to like brownie chocolate, and it was noticeably darker. Yeah. So I don't know. It's to say if you follow the recipe, you get something kind of light and sessionable.
You're saying I didn't follow the recipe?
I'm just saying if your system likes to make boozy beers.
Goddamn high. Was
that? I don't think it's the worst thing in the world, though.
1047.
You said 47.
1047.
12 points higher than it
dropped to 1010.
It's one of those Imperial milds.
Imperial mild.
Wild rice Imperial mild.
Woo! Sweet.
Good, yeah.
It was definitely sweet compared to this.
Yeah, but I liked it. You could still taste wild rice. Yeah. In this case, I think wild rice is like the featured flavor almost. But in that beer, it was almost kind of like, oh, what if wild rice was in like a chocolate dessert of some sort? So people sure drank it up at that party.
It was gone. And
I brought mine, and it was like half full at the end of the night. So
because I put my name on it, and they were like,
"Oh,
I'm drinking badass Bryon Adams, slightly this color." No,
it could be.
It could be.
Maybe one of your dreads fell in it.
Oh, here you go.
Too soon.
All right, chop for chop.
Brew for brew.
Thanks for the recipe, Dawson. Off camera.
Coming up in a future episode of Chop and Brew. As I mentioned earlier, after the Wild Rice Mild was fermented on Imperial's pub strain, DonO, Dawson, and I got together and brewed up a mega barley wine recipe from the Mashmaker book. It's called Storm in a Teacup, and it turned out huge. We pitched it onto the Imperial pub yeast cake from the mild, and it was ready to go. The beer was brewed in late January 2019, fermented, then conditioned in secondary. We got together over the summer to bottle it, and now we're just waiting to get everyone together for tasting notes to wrap up that full episode. Look for that video coming soon to Chop and Brew. Until then, brew yourself a wild rice mild this fall. You will not be let down. Find the recipe in the video description below, and let us know how it goes for you brewing with wild rice. Chop for chop, brew for brew, grain for grain, wild rice for wild grass.
All right. Does anyone need a little top off?
Oh, was I supposed to save some?
Huh.
I didn't. I did not.
Oh, you mean?
You pulled the chip?
I'm glad I have this recording.
Remember, I told you.
Put the bald guy under the fluorescent light.
Get your bald, sparkling head over there.
But then Don is so in the dark. You cool with that? You're not cool with it?
Yeah, fine.
Wait, get your phone out and we'll brighten him up. Hurry, don't be late.
A spotlight on DonO. This is a homebrewed video, man. We don't have reflectors and lighting.
It's true.
Nope. Turn them lights out!
Join them to keep the show on and popping like an airlock at... whatever. That took so much longer than I thought. Up in here with Elsa's closet, using these dresses for a mute device. Yeah, man. Absorb that sound, dresses.